Hello and good morning, everybody. What is up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz. I'm your host here on Creating Crime Time, where I sit down and I talk about true crime, and most of the time there is art involved. Now, today we are talking about an extremely horrifying case. Today we are talking about the true crime case that inspired the movie The Girl Next Door. We are talking about the murder of Sylvia Likens. Now, this case has been highly publicized due to the graphic nature of these crimes. Sylvia Likens was born on January 3rd of 1949 in Lebanon, Indiana. She would ultimately succumb to everything that had been done to her on the 26th of October of 1965. She was only 16 years old at the time, and she died in Indianapolis, Indiana. So, Sylvia was the third of 5 children born to carnival workers Lester Cecil Likens and his wife Elizabeth, or Betty Frances Grimes. She was born between 2 sets of fraternal twins. Her 2 older siblings were Daniel and Diana. They were 2 years older than her, and then the younger 2 was Benny and Jenny, and they were 1 year younger than her. Jenny suffered from polio, and this caused one leg to be weaker than the other one. She had a noticeable limp and had to wear a steel brace on one of her legs. So Lester and Betty, their marriage was severely unstable. They often sold candy, beer. They worked at several different carnival stands around Indiana throughout the summer, and they moved frequently and regularly due to the fact that they had severe financial difficulties. So their sons would regularly travel with them because they were easier to put to work, because back in this time, boys worked and women stayed home. So Sylvia and Jenny were discouraged from doing this because, out of concern for their safety and their education, they had to stay home. And it's as a result of this that they would end up bouncing between friends and relatives, and oftentimes they would live with their grandmother. So throughout her teenage years, Sylvia would earn money by babysitting, doing errands for people around the neighborhood, ironing chores for friends and neighbors, and she often would give part of what she made to her mom because her parents couldn't afford where they were. She was described as being a very lively girl, very confident and friendly. She had long, light brown hair that was wavy, and it went below her shoulders, and her nickname was Cookie to her friends. She always kept her mouth closed when smiling because she missed a front tooth. She had a missing front tooth, which she lost while she was roughhousing with one of her brothers. She also was very fond of music. In particular, she loved the Beatles, and she was very protective of her younger sister, Jenny. She was very protective of Jenny. On several different occasions, they would go to a local skating rink, and Sylvia would help Jenny skate around by holding her hand, while Jenny would skate on her unaffected foot from her polio. Now, by June of 1965, Sylvia and Jenny lived with their parents in Indianapolis. On the 3rd of July, their mother was arrested and jailed for shoplifting. Shortly after this is when Lester arranges for his daughters to board with Gertrude Baniszewski. She is a mother of two girls that his daughters had recently become acquainted with while studying at the Arsenal Technical High School. These are Paula and Stephanie Baniszewski. And at this time, this boarding agreement, Gertrude assured him that she would care for his daughters until he returned, and she would care for them as if they were her own children. Now, shortly after the 4th of July, the girls moved to 3850 East New York Street in order, like, for their father and their mom to travel to the East Coast with the carnival that they worked for. And it was through an understanding with Gertrude that she would receive weekly boarding fees of $20 to care for the girls until they returned to collect Sylvia and Jenny in November of that year. So in the initial few weeks that Jenny and Sylvia are there, the girls were subjected to very little abuse or discipline. Sylvia regularly sang along with Stephanie to different pop records, and she willingly helped with housework in the Baniszewski residence. Both of the girls attended Sunday school with the Baniszewski children, with the pastor noting on Sylvia being very, like, she really liked going to Sunday school. She had a particular devotion to her spirituality that the pastor saw. So, Gertrude Nadine Baniszewski, or her maiden name, which is Van Fossen. She was born September 19th of 1928 in Indianapolis, Indiana, to Hugh Marcus Van Fossen Sr. and Molly Myrtle Oakley. Both of them were from Illinois. They were American and Dutch descent. So Gertrude is the third of 6 children. Her family was working class. Her father would die suddenly at the age of 50 due to a heart attack in 1939. And it is then 6 years after this, so in 1945, she drops out of high school at the age of 16 to marry her 18-year-old boyfriend, John Baniszewski, who was originally from Youngville, Pennsylvania. He was of Polish descent, and she had 4 children with him. So even though he had a violent temper and rage, and he occasionally beat his wife, they would remain together for 10 years prior to their first divorce. So following her divorce from John, she marries a man named Edward Guthrie. This marriage would last just 3 months before they divorced. And shortly after this, she remarried John. And she had 2 more children with him. They then divorced for a second time in 1963. So after her third divorce, she begins a relationship with a 22-year-old man, and his name is Dennis Lee Wright, who also physically abused Gertrude. She had 1 child with him. His name is Dennis Lee Wright Jr., so named after his father. Shortly after his birth, this is when Dennis abandons her. She then files a paternity suit against him for financial support of Dennis Jr., and he was very seldom when it came to contributing to his son's life. So altogether, Gertrude, by the time it's 1965, she lives with her 7 children alone. She has Paula, who's 17, Stephanie, who's 15, John, who's 12, Marie, who's 11, Shirley, 10, James, 8, and Dennis Lee Wright is 1. She was 36-year-old. She was 5'6" in height. She weighed only about 100 pounds, and she was described as being severely underweight, asthmatic, and a chain smoker who suffered from depression due to the fact that she had 3 failed marriages, a failed relationship, and a recent miscarriage. And in addition to that, she had sporadic checks that she received from her first husband, who is a former Indianapolis policeman. And whom she primarily relied on financially to support her children. Occasionally, she had odd jobs here and there from acquaintances and neighbors, such as like sewing and cleaning. She primarily depended on what her first ex-husband gave her for means of living. So she resided in a house at 3850 East New York Street, where the monthly rent was $55. So, even though Lester agreed to pay Gertrude $20 a week, after about 2 weeks, these payments stopped arriving consistently. And it's prearranged dates that these checks should arrive, occasionally 1 or 2 days late that they would show up. Gertrude then began becoming frustrated to the fact that she wasn't receiving checks. She then would beat the sisters, like beating their bare butt cheeks with various different instruments. One of them was a 1/4-inch thick paddle, and she began making statements, well, I took care of you little bitches for a week for nothing, because their dad was unable to send the money in the exact time that she wanted. There was one occasion in late August, that both of the girls were beaten 15 times on the back with the same paddle I just mentioned. After Paula was accused the girls of eating too much food at the supper they had at church. That all of them attended. By about mid-August is when Gertrude really begins her focus primarily on Sylvia. So her motivation for doing this to Sylvia is due to her jealousy of Sylvia's physical appearance and her potential that she had. And it's according to depositions in trial testimony, this abuse was initially inflicted upon Sylvia after she and Jenny had returned to the household from high school, as well as on the weekends. This initial abuse included subjecting Sylvia to being beaten and starved. She was forced to eat leftovers or spoiled food out of garbage cans. Gertrude even said that Sylvia was stealing candy, even though Sylvia actually purchased it. There's another occasion in late August where Sylvia is absolutely humiliated when she claimed to have a boyfriend in Long Beach, who she met during the spring of 1965 when her family lived in California. And in response to this is when Gertrude said or asked if she had ever done anything with a boy. And Sylvia doesn't know what she is talking about. And she says, I guess so. And explained that she had gone skating with the boys there and once to a park on the beach with them. And continuing the conversation, this is when Stephanie and Jenny she's continuing this conversation with them. And Sylvia mentions that she once laid under the covers with her boyfriend. Now, Gertrude hears this and she's just like, why did you do that, Sylvia? And Sylvia said, I don't know. Now, several days later, this is when Gertrude returns to Sylvia. And she says, you certainly are getting big in the stomach, Sylvia. Looks like you're going to have a baby. And Sylvia thought that Gertrude was kidding. And she says, yeah, it sure is getting big. I'm just going to have to go on a diet. Because she doesn't think that she's pregnant. So Gertrude informs her and the other girls in the house that when they did something with a boy, they would be sure to have a baby. She then would kick Sylvia right in the vagina. Paula, who is 3 months pregnant at the time, is also jealous of Sylvia's appearance. She then participating in attacking Sylvia, knocking her off of her chair and onto the kitchen floor, and she says, you ain't fit to sit in a chair. There is one occasion where they're eating supper, and Gertrude, Paula, and a neighbor boy named Randy Gordon Lepper force-fed Sylvia hot dogs overloaded with condiments. Now, the condiments were mustard, ketchup, and different spices. Sylvia vomited, and then they forced her to consume her own vomit. So the only thing... Basically, this is like an act of retaliation against Sylvia. Now, and Sylvia then retaliates against them, spreading the rumor that Stephanie and Paula are prostitutes. And she did this because she was upset with the household and how she was being singled out for similar accusations. So while at school, Stephanie was propositioned by a boy who was then... He then told Stephanie that Sylvia started the rumor about her. Now, when Stephanie returned home, she questioned Sylvia about the rumor she started. Stephanie then punched her in response. Sylvia apologized while she had tears running down her face, and then Stephanie then started to cry. However, Stephanie's boyfriend, Coy Hubbard, heard of the rumor. Now he's 15, and he brutally attacked Sylvia. He banged her head against the wall. He flipped her backwards on the floor. And when Gertrude found out, this is when she used the paddle on Sylvia as well. There's another occasion where Paula beat Sylvia with such force in the face that literally she broke her own wrist due to how hard she is beating her. And the forceful hits to Sylvia's face was primarily focused on her teeth and her eyes. Paula would then use the cast that, because she broke her wrist, so she got it casted, she would then use the cast that was holding her wrist together basically to beat Sylvia. Gertrude would continue to repeat false accusations of promiscuity, engaging in prostitution against Sylvia, and she basically would go on rants about how disgusting and how filthy women are for going into prostitution, and just women in general. Gertrude would then later occasionally hit Jenny and force Jenny to hit her own sister, and she would beat Jenny if she didn't comply with hitting her. Coy Hubbard and his classmates would frequent the Baniszewski household, and they both would physically and verbally torment Sylvia, often working with Gertrude's children and Gertrude herself. So Gertrude would encourage them to beat Sylvia, which is absolutely disgusting. And these neighborhood kids would beat Sylvia. Sometimes they would use her as a practice dummy for judo sessions. They would lacerate her body. They would burn her body with lit cigarettes. This happened with an excess of over 100 times. They would severely injure her genitals as well. And they did this to entertain Gertrude. There was one day where Sylvia was forced to strip naked in the family living room, and she was then forced to masturbate with a glass bottle in their presence. It was a Pepsi bottle. And this is while Gertrude stated to all that was present, this is an act of humiliation for Sylvia to prove to Jenny what type of a girl she was. Eventually, Gertrude told Sylvia she could not go to school. And this is after she basically stated that she stole a gym suit from school due to the fact that Gertrude refused to purchase clothing for her. And because of this, she whipped Sylvia with a 3-inch wide police belt. Gertrude then switched her conversation to the evils of premarital sex before repeatedly kicking Sylvia in the genitals. As Stephanie rallied in Sylvia's defense, shouting that she didn't do anything, Gertrude then burned Sylvia's fingertips with matches before whipping her even more. It's a few days later where Gertrude then whipped Jenny with a police belt after she stole a single tennis shoe from school to wear on her strong foot. Just because Gertrude wouldn't buy them what they needed. So the girls were extremely fearful of telling any of the people in this household what was happening. They were extremely fearful of telling anybody what was happening. There was an increase of the abuse and the neglect that they were enduring. And both of them were afraid that their situation would only get worse. Jenny in particular struggled against notifying anybody. And she was threatened by Gertrude herself, so Jenny she suffered some abuse, but not to the extent of what Sylvia did. Jenny was subjected to bullying by the girls in the neighborhood, in addition to being ridiculed and beaten whenever she helped or tried to help Sylvia. In July and in August, both Lester and Elizabeth would return to Indianapolis to visit their daughters when their schedule afforded them to. And the last occasion that they visited their daughters was October 5th. And on this occasion, neither girl expressed any distress about what they're going through in the Baniszewski household. They were both in the presence of Gertrude and her children, and almost immediately, Lester and Betty left the household. And during their final visit, Gertrude turned and looked at them and said, "What are you going to do now, Sylvia, now that they're gone?" Kind of taunting her after her parents left. There's an occasion in September where the girls were encountered by Diana, shoemaker, which is their older sister, at a park. Both Jenny and Sylvia told her about the abuse and what they were going through at the hands of Gertrude and her children, and stating that Sylvia, in particular, was being targeted for this physical abuse. And this abuse was being done after, like, her not even doing anything. She was subjected to this abuse because of one woman's jealousy. Neither of them mentioned the actual address where they were living, and Diana believed her sisters must be exaggerating about what was happening, because they wouldn't give her an address. And if she actually visited them there at that time, I think she would have taken her sisters out of there. So there's several weeks prior to this where Sylvia and Jenny encountered Diana at the same park. And this is while they're in the company of Marie Benazuski and Sylvia. And at this time, Sylvia had been given a sandwich to eat by her sister because she said she was hungry. Now, Sylvia was being starved. And Sylvia remained really silent about the starvation, although Marie then revealed the fact, that she ate this sandwich to her family in late September. And in response, Gertrude said that she was gluttonous and she was engaging in gluttony, and this happened before Paula then choked and bludgeoned her. They then subjected Sylvia to a scalding hot bath in order to cleanse her skin. Gertrude then grabbed Sylvia's hair and repeatedly banged her head against the bathtub to revive her whenever she fainted. Shortly after this incident is when the father of one of the neighborhood boys, now his name is Michael John Monroe, he called the high school to anonymously report that a girl with open sores across her body was living at the Benazuski household. So Jenny and Sylvia haven't attended school in several days, and the school nurse then visits the home. And she visits the home because there is an open investigation about these claims. Gertrude then claims to the nurse that Sylvia had run away from her home the previous week and she was unaware of her actual whereabouts. She also said that Sylvia was out of control and that her open sores were likely due to the fact that she refused to maintain her personal hygiene. Gertrude then further claimed that Sylvia was a bad influence on her own children and on her sister Jenny, and the school made no further investigations concerning the Likens' welfare after this. Almost immediately, the neighbors of this family, Raymond and Phyllis Vermillion, they were like the immediate neighbors to the Benazuskis. And both of them initially viewed Gertrude as an ideal caregiver for Sylvia and Jenny, and they both visited the Benazuski residence on two different occasions while the girls were under Gertrude's care. And on both occasions, however, they witnessed Paula physically abuse Sylvia, and who on both occasions had black eyes. And they openly boasted about her mistreatment of Sylvia to them. Like, Paula openly admitted that she was abusing the crap out of Sylvia. And on their second arrival to the Benazuski household, they both observed Sylvia to be very meek and very zombified in nature. They never reported what they saw. So it's on or about October 1st, Diana discovers that her sisters have been living at the Benazuski residence. She visits the property in an attempt to initiate contact. However, this is stopped by Gertrude. She refuses to let Diana enter the house and states that Diana had received permission from Gertrude had received permission that Diana is not allowed to see either girl. She then ordered Diana off of her property, and approximately 2 weeks later, this is when Diana again encounters Jenny by chance close to home, and she asks about Sylvia. And this is when Jenny says, "I can't tell you or I'll get in trouble." So things start to escalate. So due to the increase in frequency, and how brutally Sylvia is being tortured in her mistreatment, she begins to become incontinent. So incontinence is basically when you can't hold your own pee. And she was denied to use any bathroom, so she literally had to pee herself. And as a form of treatment due to this, on October 6th, this is when Sylvia was then thrown into the basement and she was tied up. This is where they would keep her naked and rarely fed, and they would deprive her of water. It's occasionally when she would be tied to the railing of the basement stairs, with her feet barely touching the ground. So in the weeks prior to her being locked in the basement, Gertrude increased her abuse and torment on Sylvia. She would falsely claim to her children that either Sylvia herself or one of the other one, either Sylvia or Jenny were doing direct insults to them. And they then would be provoked and they would attack her. So Gertrude was literally taunting her own children to attack this poor girl. There was one time where Gertrude had a knife and challenged Sylvia to fight her back, and to which Sylvia said, "I don't know how to fight." And in response, Gertrude then inflicted a light wound to Sylvia's leg. So due to this physical and mental torment, this would occasionally pause when they would watch their favorite TV shows. Neighborhood kids would occasionally be charged 5 cents to see a display of Sylvia's body and to humiliate, beat, scald, and burn her body and ultimately mutilate her body. So throughout Sylvia's captivity in the basement, this is when Gertrude would be assisted by her children and neighborhood children to bound and gag Sylvia before placing her in a bathtub filled with scalding hot water and proceed to rub salt all over her wounds. There's one occasion where Gertrude and her 12-year-old son John would rub urine and feces from Gertrude's youngest son Dennis into Sylvia's mouth. They would take that from his diaper and rub it in Sylvia's mouth. This is before they would give her a cup half filled with water, stating that this is the only water she would receive for that day. So on the 22nd of October, John Jr. torments Sylvia by offering her a bowl of soup and said that, she's only allowed to eat the soup with her fingers. And then she quickly has the bowl taken away. And by this stage, she's suffering from extreme malnourishment. Gertrude eventually allows Sylvia to sleep upstairs on the condition that she doesn't wet herself. And that night, Sylvia whispered to Jenny that she, secretly to give her a cup of water before she fell asleep. The following morning, Gertrude then discovered Sylvia had peed herself, and as a punishment, she then forces Sylvia to insert a glass Coca-Cola bottle inside of her vagina in the presence of Gertrude and the Baniszewski children, and ordered her into the basement. After this, she then shouts at Sylvia to return to the kitchen, orders her to strip naked before proclaiming to her, "You have branded my daughters, now I'm going to brand you." She then carved the words, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it," onto Sylvia's belly with a heated needle. Now, she's unable to finish this brand, and she instructs a neighborhood boy, Richard Dean Hobbs, who's 14, to finish it. Hobbs would later insist that they were short, light etchings, and he continued to brand the text into her abdomen as Sylvia clenched her teeth and moaned. Both Hobbs and Shirley Baniszewski, who was 10, then led Sylvia back into the basement where they proceeded to use an anchor bolt in an attempt to burn the letter S beneath Sylvia's left breast. And although they applied one section of the loop backwards, this deep burn scar resembles the number 3. Gertrude then would taunt Sylvia by claiming that she would never be able to marry due to the words carved in her mouth, and she said, "Sylvia, what are you going to do now? You can't get married. What are you going to do?" Sylvia then would cry, and she said, "I guess there's nothing I can do." Later that day, Sylvia would be forced to display the carving to neighborhood children, and Gertrude would claim that she had received the inscription during a sex party. That night, Sylvia confided in her sister, "Jenny, I know you don't want me to die, but I'm going to die, I can tell." That following day, Gertrude woke Sylvia and then forced her to write a letter. And in this letter, Gertrude dictated her what she had to say. Basically, it was to mislead her parents into believing that she had run away from the Baniszewski household. And the content of this letter was intended to frame a group of anonymous local boys for extensively abusing and mutilating Sylvia after she initially agreed to have sexual relations with these boys before they inflicted extreme abuse and torture on her. So after Sylvia wrote this letter, this is when Gertrude finishes her plan with John Jr. and she decides that Jenny is going to blindfold Sylvia. They then take her to a nearby wooded area, which is known as Jimmy's Forest, and they leave her there to die. This is their plan. So after she finishes writing the letter, she then ties up Sylvia to the stair railing in the basement, offers crackers to eat. And although she refuses them by saying, "Give them to the dog, I don't want it." And in response, Gertrude forced the crackers into Sylvia's mouth before John would start beating her, particularly in the stomach. So on October 25th, Sylvia attempts to escape the basement after overhearing a conversation with Gertrude and John, and this is pertaining to the family's plan to abandon Sylvia to die. She attempts to flee from the front door, but because of her injuries, she is severely weak. Gertrude catches her before she can escape the property. She's then given toast to eat, but she can't eat it due to the fact that she's extremely dehydrated, so she's just going to vomit it back up. Gertrude then forces it into her mouth and repeatedly strikes her in the face with a curtain rod. And she strikes her with it to the point where it keeps bending in right angles. So Coy Hubbard then took the curtain rod from Gertrude and starts striking Sylvia one further time. This is when she becomes unconscious. Gertrude then drags her back into the basement. That evening, Sylvia desperately attempted to alert neighbors by screaming for help and hitting the walls in the basement with a spade, which is a type of a shovel. And one neighbor would inform the police that she heard a commotion and that she identified the source coming from the basement of 3850 East New York Street, but the noise had suddenly ceased at 3 a.m. She decided not to decided not to inform the police about this disturbance. Yeah. If she had informed them, then they would have found Sylvia. So by the morning of October 26th, Sylvia could not speak intelligibly or coordinate her limbs. She was to that point of being malnourished and dehydrated that she couldn't control her own body. Gertrude then moves Sylvia into the kitchen and she props her against a wall. She attempts to feed her a donut and give her milk. She then threw Sylvia to the floor in frustration because Sylvia can't move the cup to her lips. And then she is then brought back to the basement. After this, Sylvia is severely delirious. She moans, she's mumbling. And when Paula asks her to recite the alphabet, Sylvia is unable to recite the first 4 letters or to raise herself off the ground. Paula then threatens her after not being able to stand up, or saying that she would inflict a long jump upon her. Gertrude then orders Sylvia to clean herself. Now, see, Sylvia had literally shit herself because she has no control over anything with her body. That afternoon, the tormentors gather in the basement. Sylvia, she jerkingly moved her arms, and in an apparent attempt to point at the faces of her tormentors that she recognizes. And she makes statements like, "You're Ricky, you're Gertie," before Gertrude shouts, "Shut up, you know who I am." It's about minutes later where Sylvia unsuccessfully attempts to bite into a rotten pear. She's given to eat. She states that she could feel the looseness in her teeth. And it's upon hearing this, Jenny says, "Don't you remember, Sylvia? Your front tooth was knocked out when you were 7. Jenny then left Sylvia in the basement before performing her chores upstairs gardening for the neighbors in hope of spending money. So, in an attempt to wash her body, John sprays her with a garden hose attached to the house that afternoon. And this is done by Randy Lepper. Randy Lepper is doing this. John is laughing, and this is at Gertrude's request. Sylvia then desperately attempts to escape the basement, but she collapses before she can reach the stairs. Gertrude then stomps on Sylvia's head before standing and staring at her at several moments. Shortly after 5:30 p.m., Richard Hobbs returns to the house and immediately proceeds to the basement. He slips on the wet basement stairs and fell heavily to the floor. And this is when he sees the sight of Stephanie crying, and Stephanie is cuddling Sylvia's body. Sylvia is severely emaciated and lacerated. She's cuddling Sylvia's body after she was ordered to clean Sylvia by her mother. Stephanie and Richard then decide to give Sylvia a warm soapy bath and dress her in new clothes. They lay her on a mattress in one of the bedrooms upstairs afterwards. And as they do this, Sylvia mutters her last words and her last wish, that she wishes her daddy was there and that Stephanie would take her home. Stephanie then turned to her younger sister, Shirley, saying, "Oh, she'll be all right." So this is when Stephanie realizes that Sylvia is not breathing. She attempts to do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation as Gertrude repeatedly shouts at the kids that Sylvia is faking her own death. Sylvia was 16 when she succumbed to her injuries. So Gertrude would then beat Sylvia's corpse, shouting that she was a faker, in order to wake her. She soon panicked and she instructed Richard to call the police by a payphone. The police arrived at the house at 6:30 p.m. They then were led into the house by Gertrude to Sylvia's body, and they see that she's severely emaciated, she's extensively bludgeoned, she's mutilated, and she's laying on a soiled mattress. And she shows them Sylvia's body before she hands them a letter that she forced Sylvia to write previously. She also claims that she had been doctoring her for about an hour or more prior to her death. She applied rubbing alcohol to her wounds in an attempt for first aid before she died. She also said that Sylvia had run away from her home with several teenage boys before returning back to the house. That afternoon, she was bare-breasted and she was clutching the note, apparently. So Paula then enters the room and she says, well, she is clutching a Bible. She stated to all that are present in the household that Sylvia's death was meant to happen. Then she glances at Jenny's direction and says, "If you want to live with us, Jenny will treat you like your own sister." Now, as previously instructed by Gertrude, Jenny then recites the rehearsed version of the events that led up to her death to the police before whispering to the officers, "You get me out of here and I'll tell you everything." So the formal statement provided by Jenny prompts the officers to arrest Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, and John Jr. on the suspicion of Sylvia's murder within hours of her discovery of her body. That same day, Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs are also arrested and charged with the same offenses. The three oldest Baniszewski children, plus Coy Hubbard, were placed in custody of a nearby juvenile detention center. The younger Baniszewski children and Richard Hobbs were detained by the Indianapolis Children's Home, and all were held without bail. So Gertrude was denied any involvement in Sylvia's death, although on the 27th of October, she confessed to having known that kids, particularly her daughter Paula and Coy Hubbard, had physically and emotionally abused Sylvia. She stated that Paula did most of the damage, Coy did a lot of the beating. She then would further admit to having forced her to sleep in the basement on 3 different occasions, and that she wet the bed. She became severely evasive with one of the police officers after he stated that Sylvia had become incontinent, and he would state that it was likely the reasons like Sylvia became incontinent were because of her mental distress and her injuries to her kidneys. So Paula showed no remorse while they were asking her questions about her involvement with Sylvia. Paula signed a statement admitting that she repeatedly beat Sylvia on her butt with her mother's police belt, and one time she broke her wrist on Sylvia's jaw, and she inflicted other forms of brutality on her, like pushing her down the stairs to the basement 2 or 3 times, inflicting a black eye. John Jr. admitted to spanking Sylvia on one occasion, and most of the times using his fists. He also admitted to burning Sylvia with matches, and adding to the fact that his mother repeatedly burned her with cigarettes. 5 of the neighborhood children that participated in Sylvia's abuse, Michael Monroe, Randy Lepper, Darlene McGuire, Judy Duke, and Anna Sisko, they were subsequently arrested on October 29th. All of them are charged with causing injury to a person, and each was subsequently released into the custody of their parents under the subpoena to appear as a witness in the trial. So Sylvia's autopsy revealed that she suffered more than 150 separate wounds across her entire body. She was extremely emaciated at the time of her death. Her wounds varied in location, nature, severity, and stage of healing. Most of them were burns, severe bruising, extensive muscle and nerve damage. Her vaginal cavity was swollen shut. Her fingernails were broken backwards. Most of the external layers of her face, breast, neck, and right knee had peeled or had receded. Her death, prior to her death, Sylvia bit through her lips. And part of them were severed from her face. So her official cause of death was listed as a subdermal hematoma due to receiving a severe blow to the right temple. Both shock she had primarily suffered from due to severe and prolonged damage inflicted to her skin and subcutaneous tissue. That adding in the severe malnutrition, these were listed as secondary causes of death. Rigor mortis had fully developed at the time of discovering her body, indicating that she had been dead for up to 8 hours prior to her being found. And Dr. Kebbel did note that Sylvia had been bathed, possibly after death, and this act could have added to the loss of body temperature and thus sped up rigor mortis. So her funeral was conducted at Russell Hitch Funeral Home in Lebanon on the afternoon of October 29th. The service was officiated by Reverend Lewis Gibson. There was over 100 people in attendance. Her gray casket remained open throughout the entire ceremony, and there was a portrait of her taken of her prior to July of 1965 that sat adjoining her coffin. And in the eulogy, Reverend Gibson said, "We all have our time of passing, but we won't suffer like our little sister suffered during the last few days of her life." He then went towards Sylvia's casket before adding, "She has gone to eternity." And following the service, she was driven to Oak Hill Cemetery and she was interred there. This hearse was one of 14 vehicles in the procession that drove to the cemetery for her burial. Her headstone is inscribed with the words, "Our darling daughter." So, all of those who were arrested and charged with crimes against Sylvia went to trial. And there was a lot that came out during testimony. I'm not going to go extensively into the actual testimony. I mean, I could. I might actually. I might do a part 2 talking about just the trial. Actually, for today, we're going to stop here and I will continue on this case in a part 2. We'll go over the trial and exactly what happened after the death of Sylvia Likens. So I hope you guys enjoyed and I'll see you in part 2 of this video.